days when there was no king. Every man did what was right in his own eyes, but God raised up deliverers.
Hello and welcome back to Teaching Through the Bible. As we continue through the book of Judges, we're now in chapter 6, beginning with this narrative of Gideon. And again, as with all the judges, we have these faithful judges. We have this cycle, right? Israel is evil. They follow other gods. God gives them over to their enemies. They cry out to Yahweh to save them. He sends someone to save them, a deliverer, a judge, someone who goes and judges their enemies, who brings judgment on those oppressing the Israelites. But what do we have? We have rejection. We have God's people rejecting, ultimately, that judge and what he calls them to do. And we start the cycle all over again. So, here with Gideon, it just begins with the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. So, remember I've already mentioned this, that these aren't necessarily all in chronological order, all of these different narratives of these different judges. And they're not talking about the entire nation of Israel. And this one, though, is pretty expansive in that, remember, we have the Sea of Galilee, we have the Jordan River, and then we have the Dead Sea down there, and Mediterranean over here. Now, in this case, we see throughout this number of northern tribes getting involved up in this area, right here. Now, when we look at Midian, the Midianites are coming from the east. All right, they're over here. But it actually says that the Midianites, when they came and they started taking over, it says in verse 4, they would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza. Now, if you're paying attention to the maps, to trying to learn not just the tribes' locations, but their opposition, the other nations, cities, things like that, you'll know Gaza is over here. Not particularly far north, so it's a pretty wide range as far as when they come over, cross the Jordan River. It's not just up in the north, it gets pretty far down there. Certainly a large portion of Israel is affected by this one. It's less of a small local thing like maybe it was with Othniel or Ehud. So, we've got chapter 6 starting with this cycle again, right? It's maybe not again, maybe this is at the same time as what's going on with Othniel and Ehud, but they are oppressing the Israelites. The Israelites call out. And verse 8 reminds us, lets us know about what happened before this, historically, how they cried out when they were in Egypt and they were oppressed there, and God sent Moses to deliver them. And so this prophet doesn't say who the prophet is, it just says that when they cried out, Yahweh sent a prophet, that's verse 8, Yahweh sent a prophet to the people of Israel, and he said to them, thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery, and I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you. So he reminds them of what happened before. And that's important because who led them out? Who did God send? As I already said, as you probably already know, certainly from videos when we talked about the Exodus, it was Moses. Moses is the one who has led them out and delivered them. Well, now we're going to see a new Moses. There is a prophet, though, that we read about this in the books of the law. God promised that this prophet would be a prophet like Moses. So it was a greater Moses is coming. So here with Gideon, when we see these things we're about to point out that show us how he's like Moses, then there is potentially this expectation and this hope of, is this the guy? Right? Well, in verse 12, how does Gideon get called? Verse 12 says, the angel of Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, O mighty man of valor. He's calling him to war. Mighty man of valor. Hey, you are the one who's going to come and defeat the Midianites. And guess what? Now, Gideon sounds like he heard what the prophet had said, and he responds to what he's already heard from God's messenger, the prophet. He says, hey, what's the deal? You had this guy Moses that delivered us before, and now, what's the plan now? But Yahweh's response is essentially, funny you should mention that. That's you, man. Go for it. And so Gideon is called to be the new deliverer. But he responds as Moses responded when he says, verse 15, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. So he's saying, I'm not really a great choice. I don't think you want to pick me. But again, just like with Moses, Exodus chapter 3, what does God say? I will be with you. He gives the same promise. It's not about you. God's saying it's not about you, it's about me. I'm the one that's going to do this. I'm going to do it through you, but it's because of me. I will be with you. That's what the promise is. Just like he promised Moses, and he followed through on that promise, and now he's promising Gideon this as well. So we're seeing so many parallels, just even in just the calling of Gideon. How Gideon was called to be a deliverer in the same way as Moses was called. Moses had Yahweh show up in a burning bush. In this case, it's not a burning bush, but it does say a few times in here, it calls this the angel of Yahweh sometimes, but also just straight up Yahweh sometimes. Verse 14, and Yahweh turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you? A little note on verse 24, where in verse 24 we see something about peace, right? Verse 24, then Gideon built an altar there to Yahweh and called it Yahweh is peace. Here he's being called to go to war, and then his response is to call Yahweh is peace. It's a good reminder that peace it's not just like absence of visible conflict, right? It's not that simple. It's like if you just don't bring up a touchy subject, then okay, well now we're at peace. No, peace, shalom here is it's a wholeness, and that's something that you can't have if you're just kind of maybe silently at odds or something like that, or if you just say, okay, well, we're just going to be peaceful, and if these people attack, we'll just be kind of pacifistic about it, and we'll just, whatever they're going to do, they'll take over, we'll just take it. Like this, that's not true peace. Here, true peace is judgment on God's enemies. And so he calls him Yahweh's peace here when he knows what the mission is. And he's afraid. Which again, is that not like Moses? He's afraid, and that's a reasonable human response. But what does that mean about him? Okay, so in verse 27 it talks about, so he's supposed to destroy this altar. That's an altar of a false god in his town. Well, when he does that, he knows, well, then they're going to want to kill me. And so he's afraid of that. And he does it at night, it says, because he was afraid. And we could definitely look at that and say, that sounds like he's not doing it well. He's not doing the job well. He's afraid. He's doing it a certain way. He's doing it at night. But while it's true he was afraid, and it says specifically he did it at night because he was afraid, let's look at the full context. Because when did God tell him to do this? Verse 25, that night Yahweh said to him. and told him what he needed to do. And then it says he did it at night. So it's not like God told him one morning and he said, okay, I'm just going to wait until nightfall so then I won't get caught, hopefully. He's potentially doing this before the next day even happens, like doing it right then and there. Going ahead and getting it done at night, again, it does say, because he doesn't want to get caught, but he is not delaying. He's not pushing this off. God says do this, he's doing this. And yeah, he may be fearful, and ultimately, when God is on your side, should we be fearful when God is on our side? No. But he is doing what God told him to do, and he's not dilly-dallying about it. God says do it, he's doing it, even though he's afraid, and which in some ways is even more admirable, that even though he is afraid of death, he says, what's more important than risking my life, more important than the fact that I might die from this, is I got to follow God. Showing that faithfulness to God, even in the midst of possible death. And we see it's a well-founded fear, too. Because what happens that next day? They talk about it, they ask around, they find out, it was Gideon that did this, that tore down this altar and made a sacrifice to Yahweh instead. And they call for his death. They do exactly what he thought they were going to do. We see that when we look down later in verses 28 down to 32, it talks about that, where they say, bring out your son, that's Gideon, that he may die, for he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it. So they are legitimately trying to kill him right then. Now, his father protects him and says, hey, if that God has such a problem with it, let that God, Baal, deal with it. We're not going to kill him over this, because if that God's so great, he can do something about it. Now, here, it seems like maybe really Gideon's fear is not saying as much about him as it is about God's people in general, about the community there. Because we see that his fear was well-founded. So, yes, there's an element of him being fearful. That's valid to point that out. But he was fearful because everyone else was so against Yahweh, was not on his side, was worshiping Baal, was worshiping other gods, false gods. So him being fearful about what they're going to do shows the terrible spiritual state that everyone else is in. And contrast that with him who's willing to do the right thing even in the midst of that fear. So he's afraid, but he does not die. And then we see that Gideon, verse 36, before that he calls all these people to be an army to fight the Midianites, the northern tribes. And then he asks God for something in verse 36. If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And that happens. Then he says, all right, let's do it again. This time, so the first time, take this fleece, lay it on the ground. If there's just dew from the morning, it's wet here and not around it, then, all right, that's the sign. The next day, it's like, all right, let's do it again, but reverse. No dew on this. Dry, totally dry. Dew all around. It's wet all around on the ground, not on the fleece. Now, I've heard a lot of people take this as kind of this personal, individual sort of thing where you look for some kind of random sign, like a fleece or something, to see what God's will is for you. I can see how you would read it that way potentially, but if we look at the context, is that really what's going on here? Is that really a valid way to interpret this? Because what happened right before verse 36? This is when Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, they all went up. It says that in the verse 35, right before. And he sent messengers to those tribes, and they went up to meet them. So, all these tribes have just come to Gideon, and then, in that context, with all those tribes there, ready for battle, then Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, then do the fleece thing. So, where have we heard this kind of thing before? Moses, do you guys remember what happened with Moses when he was talking to God? Hey, they're not going to believe me. God gave him 2 signs. Just like Gideon here, he's got the first sign, the fleece is wet, the ground is not. Second sign, the fleece is not wet at all, the ground is wet. And Moses, what did he get? Take your staff, throw it on the ground, becomes a snake, right? Take your hand, put it in your cloak, take it back out, oh, you've got skin disease. He's got these 2 signs to show God's people that what he's saying is valid and that he has been sent by Yahweh. Here, Gideon is saying this and asking for the sign in the presence of all of these other people, because this is a sign not primarily for him, he already knows what his mission is, but for everyone else, for everybody else to see that sign, to know that he truly is sent by Yahweh. And this sign even has a real significance in what it is, right? Because the fleece, that represents the Midianites. It says in here that the Midianites, they came to this valley where they're all collected together with all their, like sheep, camel, all that kind of stuff, all these animals, the livestock, and there's just so many of them, all there piled in that valley, right? And then the Israelites off to the side. Well, dew in the Bible a lot of times is a representation of blessing. We see that actually in Genesis 27 when Jacob and Esau, they're doing the thing with the blessing where Esau's supposed to get blessed, but then Jacob tricks his dad to get the blessing. The blessing involves, of other things, the dew of heaven. And that's representing blessing. And there's other places as well, but dew is blessing. And we see in chapter 7, verse 12 here, it talks about what we could describe as blessing being on the Midianites. 7 verse 12 says, the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance, and their camels without number, as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. Sand that is on the seashore, there's so many of them. Where have we heard that before? That's a blessing God's giving to the Israelites. He's promised them back in Genesis, that being like, the number of them being like the sand of the seashore. So right now the Midianites have the blessing. So that fleece, that first time, all the dew is on the fleece. That's where the blessing is, the Midianites. But the second part, the next sign, all the dew is off of. There's no dew on that. The dew is all around. It's on the outside. It's not with the Midianites. So God is showing right there, it's a sign that he's going to take that blessing from them. He's taking the blessing away from the Midianites. He's promising victory to his people. And so that's what the fleece is about. It's a sign to all of God's people there that he is going to give them victory. And that's where we'll end today, talking about Gideon, and we'll continue that to see how this all points forward to Jesus next video. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.